I want to talk a bit about the death of the young American boxer Patrick Day. Go read out a bit of the BBC article and share some of my own thoughts, just to get some of the context and the specifics of this case. Boxer Patrick Day has died aged 27, 4 days after suffering a brain injury in a fight against Charles Cromwell. The American was put into a coma on Saturday after he was knocked out in the 10th round of a super welterweight bout in Chicago. Promoter Lou DiBella confirmed Day had died on Wednesday, surrounded by his family, close friends and members of his boxing team. He was the son, brother and good friend of many, said a statement. Pat's kindness, positivity and generosity of spirit made a lasting impression with everyone he met. Day was taken from the ring on a stretcher after the conclusion of the fight on the undercard of Alexander Usk's heavyweight victory over Chaz Witherspoon in the US. Patrick Day didn't need to box, the statement from DiBella Entertainment continued. He came from a good family. He was smart, educated, had good values and other avenues available to earn a living. So this guy wasn't kind of the stereotype of working class young man who needed it as a way to survive. He chose to box knowing the inherent risk that every fighter faces when he or she walks into a boxing ring. Boxing is what Pat loved to do. It's how he inspired people and was something that made him feel alive. Fellow American Cromwell, 21, who won the bout, wrote an emotional letter to Day following the fight. This is obviously before Day passed away. "I never meant this to happen to you. All I wanted to do was win," he said. "If I could take it all back, I would. No one deserves this to happen to them." Day won 17 of his 22 fights with 4 defeats and 1 draw. In July, Russia's Maxim Dadashev and Argentina's Hugo Santillan both died following injuries sustained during fights. It becomes very difficult to explain away or justify the dangers of boxing at a time like this, the statement continued. I'm not going to read out the whole article, but there's been tributes from the boxing world. Boxing announcer Michael Buffer was among the first to pay tribute, describing him as a wonderful young man before adding, "Everyone in the boxing community is crushed." WBC President Mauricio Suleiman said boxing had lost a brave, kind and wonderful friend. Frank Bruno sent out his message, "This is sobering. Sadly, Patrick Day has lost his toughest fight. Like every man who climbs through the ropes chasing the glory, he risked it all. My thoughts and condolences are with his friends and family at this very tough time. May he rest in peace." And there was tributes from a lot of other prominent fighters. Manny Pacquiao sent out his wishes before Day passed away. And I've just watched an interview with Eddie Hearn on Eiffel TV saying that he only met Patrick Day briefly, but he was clearly, holding back tears in that interview. Here's the thing. I think Hearn is absolutely right. The sport needs to evolve. It always needs to look at what ways can improve. But a situation like this really is blameless. It's not the fault of his opponent. It's not the fault of... okay, you could argue the blows are a consequence of what his opponent is doing, but it is blameless, and it's tragic in that a young man has died, at just 27 years old. On the other hand, you could look at it in a sense of he died doing something he loved. He wasn't a fragile old man who was, lying in his own... you do hear horror stories of senior citizens being treated badly in hospitals and suffering dementia and that sort of thing. And I know some of those side effects can come from long-term conditions associated with boxing, but it's so that's another way to look at it. But ultimately, boxing is a sport that can't really be vindicated, because no matter what improvements are made, and there has been significant developments made over the last 30 years, since 1987 when the 15 rounds were shortened to 12, the truth is this sport is always going to have danger. When the object is to physically make contact to try and knock out another man, then the danger is always going to be there. And I admit, as a boxing fan, times like this do make me question my motivation, my interest in the sport. It definitely casts a grey cloud over it. But I wonder too, fans of Formula 1 feel that way when, I know a French driver died earlier this year. Boxing isn't actually the most dangerous sport, despite tragedies like this. I believe, for example, the NFL has a higher ratio of brain damage. Other sports also carry real dangers. But I guess boxing is unique, along with other combat sports, in that there is an intention to hurt your opponent. Now, most fighters will say, despite all the trash talking, they genuinely do not want to leave their opponent in hospital. Take, for example, at the height of David Haye and Tony Bellew, when they were mouthing off all the trash talking, I think in their heart of hearts, even if they genuinely disliked each other, I don't think they would have ever been happy in a situation where their opponent was genuinely hospitalised. That's why fighters should never ever trivialise it, trash talk or not. For me, my response to something like this is always, it's just another reminder of why fans need to respect fighters. And unfortunately, this doesn't change anything, because that mentality still prevails among certain fans. They still will jeer guys, they still will treat them like circus performers. So that dynamic is also unfortunately part of the sport, and it's very hard to turn a boxing crowd into, say, a tennis crowd. This will always be a rough and tumble sport. I think definitely where there are areas that can improve, they should absolutely be adopted. So make it mandatory to have a doctor at every professional fight. That is the case. But honestly, I cannot think what much more can be done that isn't already being done. I do think, though, there is a culture in the sport, and this is something that, Eddie Hearn says it needs to evolve, and he's right, but unless everyone in the boxing fraternity, not just managers, not just trainers, not just boxers, but fans as well, unless there's a change of mentality in the sport, and let me clarify what I mean by this. Referees get jeered and booed if they end a fight early, but the referee is closer than anyone, and he or she knows more than the fans do. And I contend that the thrill of a good finish, a good knockout, does not equal the price of a man's life or long-term health. So if a referee feels a fighter is in danger, they should be allowed to make that call, and announcers need to understand the position they're in and support them. Even if they don't agree with it, they say, okay, well, I think that was a bit early, but his call. So I think there needs to be a lot more respect for referees. I think boxers themselves also have responsibility. They're going to fight, they're going to do what they have to do to win. But trash talking hypes a fight, but they should never ever trivialise hurting an opponent to an extent where just gets into a very dark realm. I get that in any walk of life there's going to be people you dislike, and it's natural in a competitive sport. There's going to be that rivalry there, but everyone involved, and this includes fans, so those fans that call, this guy's a tomato can, this guy's a bum, this guy, it absolutely infuriates me. And alongside cases like this, that's the aspect of the sport I most dislike. I'm not going to lie, I'm not going to suddenly, not be a boxing fan. Okay, I'm going to continue watching fights, I'm going to continue having an interest in the sport, but I think it comes down to influential people within the sport to try and to influence a change in mentality where fans don't demand that a man dies for their entertainment. And okay, I know you'll say, they're not literally demanding that, but when people get so desensitized that they start yelling at a referee, and they genuinely, they're tanked up on booze, and they want a guy to kill his opponent, then you see something like this happens, it's profoundly depressing. And it just makes it all the hard. I mean, if I was to talk to a non-boxing fan and they say justify boxing, I don't think it could do it, other than the free will issue. And that is a very, very important issue. I do think that in situations where boxing is, an avenue out of crime or an avenue away from poverty, boxing can bring stability to young men's lives to a certain degree, but I think they should be given other opportunities as well. It can't be, boxing will save them, let's just rely on that. No young man should have to fight as a means for survival, and in many parts of the world, in Colombia and Mexico and the Philippines, that's often the case, and for that matter in some parts of the United States and in Britain. And it's all the more reason why fans need to understand what these guys and women go through. So what I would like to say, I don't think that there's going to be a situation where the danger will ever be totally gone, but what I would like to see is more respect from fans. Because it's not enough to say, send all the condolences when someone dies. I have no doubt some of the people saying how sad it is would have been, the sort of people jeering other fighters, maybe even this fighter. I have to admit, I wasn't familiar with his career. But something has to change in terms of attitudes. Outlawing boxing, I think, is the wrong answer, because the free will factor with boxing is very important. Now, I think there's areas, and not to go off on a tangent here, but things should be banned because they are impacting other people. So, for example, I do not believe that any civilian should have a military-style weapon, thinking of the US gun issue. That impacts other people. It leads to a situation where mass shootings are far more likely. That's a fact. And the vast majority of mass shootings, major mass shootings in recent years, have been by military-style weapons. That's where the my right to own guns becomes a flawed argument. No one has a right to own a military style weapon. Now, the only reason I'm making that analogy is to kind of draw a parallel, or the other end of the spectrum. So that's where something being banned or something being curtailed has a greater interest at heart. Boxing, yes, there is a price on boxers' families, but when a boxer dies in the ring and he's chosen that path, every man who enters the ring, every woman who enters the ring knows that they're taking a risk. And to ban it, well, firstly it would galvanise the underground scene, which means far fewer rules, far less regulation. I think that would be a mistake. So those who want to ban boxing, there may be an area, I know the American healthcare system is different, but people may say, well, boxers choose a risk, so they should pay the cost for medical treatment. Well, in America, that's, the healthcare system is different anyway. But in the case of Britain, there may be a valid argument there, i.e. if a boxer gets seriously injured, should he foot the bill? I don't know. I think that's a bit callous on the surface, but these are all the sort of questions that come into it. The truth of the matter is, I would also like to say, and I know this is wishful thinking, but there's a big obsession in the sport with knockouts. Personally, I prefer a fight where it's a good 50-50 fight, both guys are giving it their all, there's a lot of action, but both guys are standing at the end and it wins on points. I think the obsession with knockouts means inevitably there's going to be a focus on the head, which inevitably leads to problems. I mean, it's very rare that a boxer dies from, for example, body shots. It's almost always head trauma. So the obsession with knockouts might be something that needs to be looked at. And I get it, a big knockout is, a big thing, and this guy's had so many knockouts in a row and so on. Maybe the obsession with that, if there was less an obsession with that, there would be less focus on powerful headshots, and that could change the dynamic. But there is other things to think about. We think about what happens in the ring. The average professional boxer these days only has about 3 professional fights a year. So the actual amount of physical contact on fight night is probably significantly less than what goes on in the gym. I think there needs to be more scrutiny of actually what goes on in the gym, in sparring. The whole idea of sparring is preparing a fighter, but more often than not, guys that are training a fighter, guys that are preparing, they treat that like the real fight, so they're suffering potentially ongoing damage. And then it could be that the fight itself, it looks like the fight has brought that on, but it may be what's going on in the gym. So maybe training techniques need to be scrutinised. I think there is areas that can improve. I don't think it will ever take away the danger from the sport completely, but if it means fewer deaths, if it means fewer guys ending up in wheelchairs and, in terrible states, that has to be a good thing. But the free will factor is there. You cannot tell free thinking adults you are not allowed to do this. That's depriving people of ambition. It's depriving people of, because what a boxer would say is, yes, I know I'm risking my life, but that makes my life more. Quite honestly, if you're a professional boxer, you have thousands of people watching you, you're getting a lot of money for that, and you're winning. That's a far more exciting life than being an accountant. And you might say, well, the accountant will live to 90. The boxer could die at 30. But I am a believer that what we do in life isn't just in the number of years, but what we do in those years. So from that point of view, Patrick Day had a full life. He'd done something that most people do not do. And to me, it's why boxers need to be respected. There's fighters I don't particularly like. I don't like their personality. But I think as a standard rule, we need to respect them. And this is not going to be the last case. Sadly, there will be other deaths in boxing. Only last year, Scott Westgar from Glasgow, or Dundee, I believe it was. Glasgow. But, this sport will always have danger. That doesn't mean people, the boxing fraternity just kind of is complacent and says, oh, let's do nothing. But I think there has to be an acceptance that the danger will always be there, whilst evolving it, whilst looking at the culture within boxing, the focus on knockouts, the pressure that fans put on fighters and referees. There are areas that can be looked at. My heart goes out to his family. I think there is a burden on boxers' families, and that needs to be understood. But presumably, if you're the wife or girlfriend of a boxer, you know the life he has. You know the risks that he's taking, and you've agreed to go along with that life. And I don't want to make an analogy exactly with soldiers, because boxers aren't exactly dying for their country in the same way. But military wives, they know that their man will often be away from home, and they, it's often said it's a real burden for them, knowing the dangers he faces and all that comes with that, and the long periods that he's away. And again, I'm not making a direct comparison, because boxers are not, it's a sport. It's something that they're doing for ambition, not defending their country, but it's still a risk. And it's just very sad. But those are my thoughts. I don't think banning boxing is the answer. I think the sport needs to evolve. I think there's areas that can definitely be looked at, but that has to come with a caveat. The risk will always be there, and so long as men want to put on gloves, so long as they want to test their abilities in the ring, it's going to be around. It was around 300 years ago. It was around in the ancient world. I'd be surprised if boxing's completely gone 100 years from now.